Maya Noonan pressed her palms flat against the stone table and refused to look at the midwife's arms. She already knew what was in them. She had felt the second birth, the weight of it, the silence that followed, the way the room had gone very still. She did not need to see the child to know that something was wrong. Not with the pup, with everything else. The royal birthing chamber inside Ironvale Citadel was deep in the east wing, 3 floors below the throne room, built from pale limestone blocks that had stood for 400 years. Torches lined the curved walls. Heavy tapestries bearing the Alden silver wolf crest hung on either side of the iron-framed door. Outside, through the narrow slit of a window, the sky burned a deep, unnatural red. A red moon. It hung low and full over the Ironvale Ridge, the kind of moon that old pack members still whispered about when they thought no one was listening. A red moon on a birth night meant change. It had always meant change. Ruby Fletcher, the royal healer, stood near the foot of the table with the second pup cradled in a linen cloth. She was 34 years old, sharp-eyed and careful with her words in the way that people who knew too many secrets tended to be. She had been in this chamber for 6 hours. She had delivered both boys herself. And she had seen something in the second child's face the moment he drew his first breath. Something that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with a man who was no longer in this kingdom. The first pup, Leo, lay wrapped in silver wool in the carved oak bassinet near the window. He had a full crown of pale, almost white hair and clear gray eyes. He looked exactly as an Alden heir was supposed to look. Every wolf in the court would say so by morning. The second pup was darker. His hair was deep chestnut, nearly black at the roots. His eyes, still adjusting to the torchlight, caught the glow and reflected it back as amber gold. He was larger than his brother, heavier in the arms, louder in his first cries. He was healthy. There was nothing wrong with him. There was everything wrong with who he reminded Maya of. She turned her face away from him. Her jaw was set. Her fingers gripped the edge of the stone table hard enough that her knuckles went white. "Take him out of my sight," she said. Ruby did not move immediately. She looked at Maya with an expression that was not quite disbelief and not quite anger, but something pressing hard against the line between both. "My queen," she said, very quietly. "He is healthy. He is strong. He shifted a full 1/4 inch before the cord was cut. That is not a weak wolf. I did not ask for your opinion. A Ruby." Maya's voice was flat and steady in the way that people's voices get when they are working very hard to keep from breaking. "I said take him out." Ruby closed her eyes for one long breath. Then she carried the boy out through the servants' passage on the far side of the chamber. By the time Alpha King Zachary Alden entered the room 3 minutes later, there was only one bassinet. He was a tall man, broad across the chest, eyes with the kind of authority that came from genuinely not having doubted himself very often. He looked at his wife first. She was pale, her hair damp against her neck, and then at the bassinet, and then back at Maya with a wide, unguarded smile. "A son," he said. "Yes," Maya said, "a son." He crossed the room and looked down at Leo, and the pride on his face was the kind that filled a room. He did not ask about a second birth. He did not notice the second set of linen cloths near the washing basin. He saw exactly what he wanted to see, and Maya let him. Ruby, standing in the narrow servants' passage with the second pup still in her arms, listened to the Alpha King's voice through the door and understood exactly what she had just become part of. She looked down at the boy's golden eyes, and he looked back at her with the focused, unblinking attention of a child who was already paying very close attention to the world he had been dropped into. "Sean Reeve," she said under her breath, to no one. The resemblance was unmistakable, the same jaw, the same set of the brow, the same gold in the eyes. She took the boy to the lower servants' hall before dawn and registered him under the name Rory, given the surname Wither after the retired stablemaster who agreed, for reasons Ruby did not ask about, to have him placed among the stable workers' children. No one in the upper citadel asked questions. Servant-born pups came and went. It was not unusual. It was, in fact, the most common story in Ironvale. That night, Ruby sat alone in her workroom on the second floor and stared at the wall for a long time. She was thinking about blood. Specifically, she was thinking about the fact that blood does not change its nature simply because someone decides it is inconvenient. The years inside Ironvale Citadel moved at 2 speeds, depending entirely on which floor you were born on. Leo Alden grew up on the 3rd floor, in a suite of rooms that overlooked the training yard and the silver birch forest beyond the east wall. By the time he was 7, he had his own sword tutor, a retired pack warrior named Bailey Rutherford, who was missing 2 fingers on his left hand and had absolutely no patience for children who did not pay attention. Leo paid attention. He was a quick learner, athletic, and genuinely liked by the wolves who trained him. He was not arrogant, which surprised most people who expected the alpha heir to be. He was simply confident in the way that children are when they have never had serious reason to doubt whether they belong somewhere. He had his father's broad shoulders and his mother's habit of going very quiet before he said something important. By age 9, he could out-wrestle boys 3 years older than him. The court noticed. The court always noticed things like that when it came to Leo. Rory Wither grew up in the stable yard. His days started before sunrise with water hauling, feed distribution, and the kind of hard, repetitive labor that builds muscle in children and patience in adults. He was managed by the head stable hand, a weathered man named Oscar Copeland who was fair but strict and not given to warmth as a general rule. Rory did not complain about this. He learned early that complaining changed nothing in the stable yard. What changed things was doing the work better than anyone expected and keeping your head down while you did it. He was stronger than the other stable boys by a significant amount, and faster, and he had instincts with the horses that unnerved some of the older hands. He could calm a spooked stallion by standing still and breathing slowly in a way that was more wolf than human. My Oscar Copeland watched this and said nothing about it directly, but he started giving Rory the difficult horses, the ones that had injured other handlers. Rory never got injured. Ruby Fletcher visited the stable yard twice a month on the pretense of checking the horse's health. She brought Rory books, old ones, borrowed from the lower Citadel library, pack law texts, histories of Ironvale, volumes on wolf genealogy. She taught him to read in stolen half hours while the other stable boys were at their midday break. "Why are you teaching me this?" Rory asked her one afternoon. He was 8 years old and sitting on an upturned bucket with a worn genealogy volume open across his knees. He asked the question without resentment. It was a genuine question. Ruby considered how to answer it. "Because knowing the law is how you protect yourself," she said. "And because you have the right to know it." He accepted this. He went back to reading. The first time the twins saw each other clearly was an accident. Leo had slipped away from his afternoon sword lesson by claiming a stomach complaint, which Bailey Rutherford did not believe but allowed, because the boy trained harder than any heir he had worked with, and occasionally the stomach complaint was code for needing 20 minutes alone. Leo had wandered to the lower courtyard near the east gate, which he was technically not supposed to visit unescorted. He was crouched behind a stone water trough, watching a lizard work its way up the wall, when Rory came around the corner carrying a bridle. They both stopped. Rory was 8 years old, same as Leo. He had dark hair pushed back from his forehead and eyes that caught the afternoon light and turned gold. He was looking at Leo with the same focused stillness he used with the difficult horses. Leo was looking at Rory with his mouth slightly open, because he had the strange and specific feeling of looking at a version of himself that had been left somewhere else and had grown up differently. He could not have articulated it. He was 8. But the feeling was real, and it did not go away when Rory nodded once, adjusted the bridle under his arm, and walked past him without speaking. Leo watched him go. He did not tell anyone about it. 3 floors up in the Citadel, Maya Noonan attended her second afternoon gathering of the week, smiled at the right people, poured wine at the right moments, and kept her shoulders squared and her chin level in the way that Zachary liked. When a servant boy crossed the far edge of the upper courtyard below the gathering room window, dark-haired, moving with the easy, unhurried confidence that seemed completely at odds with his station, Maya looked away so fast that the cup in her hand rattled against the stone sill. She set it down. She did not look out the window again. She kept tapping her thumb against the inside of her wrist for the rest of the afternoon, a habit she had when her mind was somewhere she did not want it to go. The truth about Sean Reeve had not disappeared simply because no one said his name. He had been a warrior captain in the Iron Vale Outer Guard 12 years ago, the best one they had. Most of the older soldiers agreed, though none of them said this out loud anymore for reasons that had become obvious over time. He was tall, dark-haired, and the kind of soldier who understood tactics the way some men understood music, which is to say, instinctively and without needing to be taught. He had served the Citadel for 7 years before the problem started. The problem was Maya Noonan, who was at that time not yet Luna Queen, but the daughter of the Noonan Packlord from the Northern Ridge, brought to Ironvale at 17 for a political mating ceremony with Alpha Zachary Alden that had been arranged when she was still a child. She had not objected to the arrangement. You did not object to arrangements like that in Ironvale. You attended the ceremony, you accepted the mark, and you performed the duties of Luna Queen with the grace and composure that the position required. What you were not supposed to do was spend the 6 months before the mating ceremony falling in love with a guard captain who had dark eyes and a habit of reading in the lower courtyard after his shift ended. They had been careful, extraordinarily careful. The meetings were few and hidden and always brief, wedged into the narrow spaces between obligations, a quarter hour in the East Garden after midnight, a stolen conversation behind the granary wall during a feast. Maya had understood from the beginning that it was impossible. She had understood it even while it was happening. Sean had understood it too, and it had not stopped either of them. The mating ceremony with Zachary happened on schedule. 2 weeks after the ceremony, Dr. Sean Reeve was transferred to the border garrison at Greystone Pass, not punished exactly, not accused of anything specifically, but removed from proximity with a thoroughness that was itself a statement. Maya had stood at her new chamber window and watched the garrison riders leave through the south gate at dawn and said nothing to anyone. She had not been certain, when she found herself carrying a pup 3 months into her mating, whether the timing pointed toward Zachary or toward those brief stolen weeks before the ceremony. The birth had answered that question in the most public and unignorable way possible. She had answered it by pretending there was only one pup. Now, 11 years later, Sean Reeve was reportedly somewhere in the Western Territories. No one in the Citadel mentioned him. Ruby Fletcher thought about him regularly because she was the only person alive in Ironvale who knew what she knew. Maya's health had been declining in small, persistent ways for about 2 years. She slept badly. Her hands shook occasionally during formal meals, the kind of fine tremor that she hid by pressing her palms flat against the table. She had lost weight, and not from illness exactly, but from the particular kind of physical erosion that comes from long-term guilt and the energy required to maintain a lie that is always half a conversation away from exposure. The Citadel physicians recommended rest and herbal preparations. They were not wrong, but they were also not diagnosing the actual problem. Ruby diagnosed the actual problem. She kept her diagnosis to herself. The visiting elder who nearly brought everything down prematurely was a pack elder from the Southern Territories named Jordan Yeardley, who had known Maya's family for decades and had an old wolf's habit of saying exactly what he observed without considering whether it was appropriate. He had been in the Citadel for a diplomatic visit in the spring of Rory's 11th year. He had walked past the stable yard on his way to the lower granary and stopped. Ruby had been nearby. "That stable boy," the elder said, gesturing toward Rory, who was working a young mare in circles near the fence. "What pack is he from?" "He is servant-born, Elder Yeardley," Ruby said. The elder was quiet for a moment. When he watched Rory work the horse with the practiced eye of a man who had assessed pack bloodlines for 60 years. "He carries a royal scent," the elder said. "Faint, but it is there." He turned and looked at Ruby directly. That is an Alden bloodline marker. With respect, Elder Yeardley, servant-born lineages mix widely, Ruby said, holding his gaze without blinking. The elder looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at Rory. Then he turned and walked toward the granary without saying anything else. Ruby went back to the infirmary and sat very still at her workbench for 20 minutes. The pressure she had been managing for 11 years was building. It would not hold indefinitely. She had always known it would not hold indefinitely. She had been telling herself she was waiting for the right moment, but the truth was that she was afraid, and fear is not a strategy. She began quietly to prepare herself for what was coming. The annual wolf hunt at Frostmere Ridge was a tradition in Ironvale that went back 2 centuries. It happened every autumn when the forest north of the citadel went copper and gold and the deer came down from the high slopes. The Alpha King led it, accompanied by senior warriors, younger trainees, and, in the year that Leo turned 12, the heir himself, who had been formally declared old enough to participate. Rory Wither was not invited to the hunt. Stable hands were not invited to hunts. What Rory was doing at Frostmere Ridge on that particular morning was following a runaway gelding that had panicked during the night and cleared a fence on the lower pasture side. Oscar Copeland had sent him at first light because Rory was the fastest and because the horse in question was one of the valuable ones. The ridge was 5 miles from the citadel, on a long slope of rock and pine that dropped off sharply on the eastern face into a ravine where a fast-moving river ran brown and cold year-round. The hunt party had been on the ridge for 2 hours when Leo, who had become separated from the group while tracking a deer down a side trail, found himself at the edge of the eastern drop. He had misjudged the slope. It happened fast the way these things always happen fast. One moment he was moving forward. The next the ground was no longer where his foot expected it to be, and then he was sliding, grabbing at pine roots and wet rock, and then he was over the edge and in free fall for a stomach-dropping second before he hit the ravine wall and grabbed a root that bent but held. The current below him was loud and white and entirely indifferent to the situation. He yelled for help. The sound went up the ridge and got swallowed by the pines. Rory heard it. He had found the gelding tied to a birch tree 50 yards back from the ridge and was heading back down the slope when the shout reached him. He did not stop to think about it. He ran toward the sound with the horse's lead rope still in his hand, dropped it when he reached the edge, and looked down. Leo was 10 feet below the lip of the ravine, hanging from a root that was visibly pulling free from the rock. His knuckles were white and his face was controlled in the particular way that people's faces get controlled when they are very frightened and working hard not to show it. Rory dropped to his stomach and reached down. He was too far away. The thing that happened next was not something Rory had planned or consciously initiated. He had been approaching his shift age, but had not yet shifted. Most wolves did not shift fully until 13, and some not until 15. What happened at the edge of that ravine was that his body made the decision without consulting him. The shift came up through him like a wave, fast and total, the way it comes when the body overrides everything else because the situation requires it. He shifted fully in under 3 seconds. His wolf was large, larger than it should have been for a 12-year-old. With dark fur along the back and flanks and a marking on the chest that the wolves of the Ironvale court would have recognized instantly if any of them had been present to see it. It was a crescent shape, silver-white against the dark coat, sitting high on the left side of the chest, the hereditary Alden royal mark carried by every true-born member of the bloodline, unmistakable and never duplicated outside it. Rory's wolf braced against the rock, got his jaws around Leo's coat sleeve, and pulled. Leo got a hand up over the edge, then his elbow, then his whole torso, and they both rolled back from the drop together and lay there on the flat rock, breathing hard. Rory shifted back. He was shaking slightly, and there were scratches on his palms from the rock, but he was otherwise unhurt. Leo lay on his back and stared at the sky. Then he turned his head and looked at Rory. "You shifted," Leo said. "Yes," Rory said. "You have the crescent mark." Rory said nothing. Dia Alpha King Zachary arrived at the ridge with 2 warriors 7 minutes later, having doubled back when Leo did not rejoin the group. He found his son sitting up on the flat rock near the eastern drop with a stable hand from the citadel sitting 3 feet away. He took in the scene quickly: the torn coat, the scratches on Leo's hands, the proximity to the ravine edge. Then he looked at the stable hand the way he always looked at people he had not looked at carefully before, and was now making up for lost time. He looked at Rory's chest. The shirt Rory had been wearing had torn during the shift. The crescent marking on his wolf was gone, of course. He was human now, but Zachary was not looking at the marking. He was looking at Rory's face, his jaw, the set of his brow. The gold in his eyes caught the afternoon light. Zachary's face went very still. "What is your name?" he said. "Rory, sir. Rory Wither. I work at the stables." "You shifted," Zachary said. It was not a question. The 2 warriors behind him were also very still. "Yes, sir." "How old are you?" 12, sir." Zachary looked at his son. Leo was watching him with gray eyes that were doing a calculation Zachary was not prepared for his 12-year-old to be doing. The ride back to the Citadel was the longest 5 miles Zachary Alden had ever traveled. 2 days after the hunt, Leo Alden walked into his father's study without knocking, which was something he had never done before. Zachary was at his desk reviewing territory maps, and he looked up sharply, and then his expression did something complicated when he saw his son's face. Leo was 12 years old, but the question he had brought into the room was not a child's question. He had been carrying it for 2 days, might turning it over the way you turn over a stone that you suspect something is living under, and he had decided that he needed to know more than he needed to be comfortable. He stopped in front of the desk and looked at his father. "Why does Rory look like me?" he said. Zachary set his pen down. He was quiet for a long moment. He was the kind of man who had answers for almost everything. He was an alpha king. And being without answers was not a condition he had extensive practice with, and Leo could see him searching for one now and not finding it. His father's hands were flat on the desk, and he was looking at them rather than at Leo. Leo waited. He understood that the silence was not empty. It was full of something. Finally, Zachary looked up. "Where did you see him after the hunt?" "I see him sometimes in the lower courtyard," Leo said, "and at the east gate. I have seen him before. He has always looked like me. I did not know what to do about that until now." Zachary was quiet again. "Father," Leo said, "he has the crescent marking." The room was very still. Zachary pressed his fingertips together and looked out the study window at the training yard where 2 young warriors were running a drill in the afternoon sun. He had built his reign on order, on visible strength, on the certainty that his house stood on solid ground. The idea that a truth had lived inside his walls for 12 years without his knowledge unsettled him more than betrayal would have. Betrayal implies an enemy. This was something closer to blindness. He did not answer. Leo left the study with the question still unanswered and the knot in his chest considerably tighter. He walked down 2 flights of stairs to the lower infirmary and knocked on Ruby Fletcher's door. Ruby opened it and looked at him for a moment. She could see from his face that he had already done most of the work himself. She stepped back and let him in. She told him the truth. She did not tell it all at once, and she did not make it dramatic. She told it the way someone tells a thing they have been holding for 11 years, carefully and with some grief, because the thing itself was sad regardless of how it came out. She told him about the second birth. She told him about Maya's reaction. Oh, she told him about Rory being placed with the stable workers the night he was born. She told him that Rory was not weak-blooded and had never been weak-blooded and had in fact been born strong enough to partially shift at birth. She did not yet tell him the full story of Sean Reeve. She was not ready for that, and neither, she judged, was he. "He is my brother," Leo said. He said it without any particular shock in his voice, which told Ruby that he had already half arrived at this conclusion on his own. He said it as a statement of fact that he was letting land properly in his chest. "Yes," Ruby said. He saved my life. Yes. Leo sat with that for a moment. Then he said, My mother knows all of this. Yes. His jaw tightened. He nodded once. He got up and left. Upstairs, Maya was in her private receiving room when Zachary entered and closed the door behind him. She could tell from the way he crossed the room, measured, deliberate, the way he moved when he was managing something large, that the conversation she had been delaying for 11 years had arrived. He sat down across from her. He did not raise his voice. He was not, in the end, a man who shouted. He was a man who went very quiet when the situation was serious, and his voice now was so quiet it barely moved the air. Whose son is the stable boy? Maya? She had spent 11 years building walls against this question, and she watched them all come down in about 4 seconds. Her hands went to her lap. She looked at her husband's face and saw not rage, but the particular devastation of a man who had suspected something true and was now being made to confirm it. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. Her eyes filled. She pressed her fingers against her lips and breathed through her nose and tried to hold herself together, and could not. Zachary watched her and waited. He would wait as long as it took. The great hall of Iron Vale Citadel held 300 wolves on a formal assembly day. It was a long, wide room of pale stone with high windows that let in cold northern light, and a raised dais at the far end where the alpha throne sat flanked by 2 carved silver wolf heads that had watched 6 generations of Alden kings conduct pack business. It was not typically used for family matters. Zachary chose it deliberately. He sent word 2 days after his conversation with Maya, summoning the senior council, the pack elders, and the household heads. He did not explain the reason in the summons. He did not need to. An unannounced full assembly at Iron Vale meant something had shifted, and the Citadel spent those 2 days in the specific suspended tension of a pack that knows a change is coming and does not yet know its shape. Rory was informed of the assembly by Oscar Copeland, who appeared at the stable yard on the morning of the 2nd day with an expression that was doing a great deal of work, and told Rory that the Alpha King required his presence in the Great Hall at midday. He gave Rory a clean shirt and told him to wash his hands and face and offered no further explanation. Rory stood in the stable yard holding the clean shirt and thought about it for a moment. He did not know everything, but he had known for 2 days that something had changed. Because Leo Alden had come to the stable yard the previous morning and stood in front of him and looked at him the way people look at something they are trying to memorize. I know what happened, Leo had said. Ruby told me. Rory had looked back at him. He was not sure yet what he felt about that, or whether he was supposed to feel anything at all. All right, he said. You saved my life. Yes. We look exactly alike. I know. Leo had been quiet for a moment, and then he had said, with the directness of someone who had thought about it overnight and decided that directness was the only approach that was not an insult, Are you angry? Rory had considered the question seriously because it deserved serious consideration. He had grown up in the stable yard. He had hauled water at 5 a.m. every day of his life. He had never sat at the family table or learned to read from a tutor or been told once by his mother that she was proud of him. He had a great deal of legitimate raw material for anger. I have been angry for a long time, he said. I just did not know what I was angry at. Leo nodded. That was the end of that conversation, but it was not the end of what it meant. In the great hall on the assembly morning, Zachary stood at the front of the room and waited until the hall was full and the doors were closed. Maya stood to his right. Pale and perfectly composed in the way that people are composed when they have decided to stop running, and the steadiness comes from surrender rather than strength. Ruby Fletcher stood near the healer's alcove to the left. Rory stood near the back of the hall, which was where Oscar Copeland had positioned him, beside 2 senior warriors who did not look at him and did not crowd him. Leo stood at his father's left. Zachary began. He spoke in the measured, direct way he spoke when he was not performing authority but actually using it. He told the assembly what had happened 11 years ago in the birthing chamber. He told them about the twin birth. He told them that the second pup had been placed in the stable yard under a false name and registration. He did not soften any of it. He told it plainly. The hall was completely silent. Then he said, "Maya Noonan will speak." Maya stepped forward. She looked at the assembly. 300 wolves, all of them watching her, some of them confused, some of them already constructing what they thought they understood. She had practiced this. She had written it out and crossed it out and written it again, and eventually decided that the only version she could actually speak was the true one, without decoration. 12 years ago, she said, before my mating ceremony with the Alpha King, I was in love with a warrior captain named Sean Reeve. That love was not permitted and not acted upon in any way that I could have claimed openly. It was brief, and it was real, and it ended when he was transferred to the border garrison. She paused. When I gave birth to twin pups and saw that the second child's appearance suggested a closer connection to those weeks before my mating than I wanted to confront, I made a choice that I have spent every day since then paying for. I rejected my own son. I ordered him removed from my sight. And for 12 years, I allowed this kingdom to pretend he did not exist. No one in the hall moved. He has lived in this citadel for 12 years, Maya continued. He has worked in the cold and hauled water and tended horses and learned to read from a woman who was braver than I was. He saved my firstborn son's life 3 weeks ago at Frostmere Ridge, and I have not said his name to him once. She stopped speaking. The silence was not comfortable. It was the kind of silence that holds judgment and grief and something that was not quite forgiveness, but might become it, given time. Leo stepped forward from his father's left. He was 12 years old and not very tall, and the hall looked enormous around him, but he walked to the center of the dais and looked at the assembly with his mother's composure and his father's certainty, and said, in a voice that carried clearly to the back wall, "He saved my life. He is my brother. That is a fact this pack will acknowledge from this day forward." At the back of the hall, Rory stood very still. He was gripping the front of the clean shirt Oscar had given him with both hands, and he was staring at the stone floor, and his jaw was working in the specific way that jaws work when a person is managing something large behind their face. He did not look up for a long moment. When he did, he found Zachary looking at him from the dais. Not with warmth, exactly. Not because the situation was not a warm one, but with the directness of a man who had decided on a course of action and would follow it. "Rory," Zachary said. 300 wolves turned to look at him. Rory straightened his spine and walked to the front of the hall. The formal acknowledgement ceremony was held 5 days after the assembly, in the smaller Eastern Council chamber rather than the Great Hall, because Zachary had decided, correctly, that what was needed now was clarity rather than spectacle. There were 12 people present. The senior council, Ruby Fletcher, Oscar Copeland, who had been given formal thanks by the Alpha King in terms that made the old stable master clear his throat several times and look at the ceiling, and the 2 boys. Zachary read the acknowledgement into the official pack record with Bailey Rutherford as the witnessed scribe. The language was plain. Rory Wither, born in Ironvale Citadel under the red moon of the autumn 12th year of King Zachary's reign, was formally recognized as the son of Luna Queen Maya Noonan, bearing equal standing with Leo Alden as a member of the royal line. His surname was amended in the record from Wither to Alden. He was not declared the primary heir. Leo had been raised and trained as heir, and nothing in the situation changed that practically, but he was placed beside his brother in the record as an equal branch of the royal bloodline, with all protections and recognitions that entailed. Rory Alden. It was written in the pack record in Bailey Rutherford's precise, cramped handwriting, and it stayed there. After the ceremony, the council filed out and the room emptied. Ruby Fletcher lingered near the doorway and watched. Maya asked to speak with Rory alone. Zachary looked at Rory and let him decide. Rory nodded. They sat across from each other in the Eastern Council chamber with the afternoon light coming in at an angle through the narrow windows. Maya was thinner than she had been 2 months ago, and the darkness under her eyes had not improved, and the composure she was maintaining cost her visibly. She was 41 years old and looked, in that moment, every year of it. She did not try to make it a small thing. "I denied you because I could not look at myself in the mirror," she said. "Not because of anything you were or anything you did. I made you pay for my fear, and there is nothing I can offer you that is worth what you lost." Rory had been sitting with his forearms on his knees, looking at the table. He was quiet for a moment. He had been very quiet for 5 days, which was how he processed things. He had always been a slow and thorough processor. "I know who Sean Reeve was," he said. Ruby had told him the full story 3 days ago at his request. He had listened to all of it without interrupting. "Yes," Maya said. "You loved him." "Yes, and losing him was not your choice." Maya's hands were pressed flat on the table. "No, it was not." Rory raised his head and looked at her. He had her gray eyes and Sean Reeve's dark hair and his own entirely specific expression, which was different from both of theirs and belonged to no one but him. "Then we were both punished for something that was not our fault," he said. The room was quiet. "I am not going to pretend that 12 years did not happen," he said. "I am not going to tell you it is fine, because it is not fine. But I am also not going to spend the rest of my life being angry at a woman who was afraid." He looked at her steadily. "I know what you were. I would like to see what you choose to be now." Maya exhaled very slowly. She pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose for a moment. When she lowered her hand, her eyes were wet, but her voice was level. "I would like the chance to show you," she said. "Then we can start from there," Rory said. It was not forgiveness. It was something more practical than forgiveness, which is the decision to stay present and see what happens rather than let the past make all future choices. It was the beginning of a thing that neither of them knew yet how to name. In the weeks that followed, the Citadel adjusted. Adjustments of this kind are never seamless. There were council members who were stiff and formal with Rory in ways they were not stiff and formal with Leo. And there were servants who watched him move through the corridors with the cautious curiosity of people who were recalibrating their understanding of the world. There were also people, particularly among the household staff and the lower wolves who had known Rory in the stable yard, who greeted the change with a blunt satisfaction that needed no performance. Bailey Rutherford added Rory to his training sessions within the week. He did this without ceremony, on simply appearing at the stable yard at the regular training hour and telling Rory to come with him. When Rory arrived in the training yard and looked at the practice swords, Rutherford handed him one and said, "You are 12 years behind where you should be. We will fix that." He was not gentle about it. He never was. But he was fair, and within a month he told Oscar Copeland privately that the new boy had the best instincts of any student he had worked with in 20 years. He did not say this to Rory. There was no need for it. Leo and Rory moved around each other in the early weeks with a careful attention that was not quite comfort and not quite distance, but something building between those 2 points. They shared the training yard. They ate at the same table. One afternoon, Leo came to find Rory at the fence near the east pasture, where Rory still went habitually at the end of the day because it was where his body expected to be. And they stood there for a while watching the horses without needing to fill the space with words. "I want to learn about horses," Leo said eventually. Rory looked at him. "You already know horses." "I know how to ride them. That is not the same thing." Rory considered this and recognized it as true. "Come tomorrow at first light," he said, "before Rutherford gets you." Leo came at first light, and the morning after that, and the one after that. Ruby Fletcher watched this from a distance with the specific relief of someone who has been carrying a thing alone for a very long time and has finally set it down. She was not naive about what was ahead of them. Rory's standing was acknowledged but not universal, and the question of Sean Reeve's fate, whether he was alive, where he was, whether he would ever know about his son, was still open and still complicated. There were political questions that would not resolve easily. There were council members who would make the road harder than it needed to be. But the thing that had needed to be true was now true, and that mattered more than she could easily say. On the night of the first clear full moon after the ceremony, Rory shifted in the eastern pasture for the second time in his life. He had been practicing the control of it with Bailey Rutherford's blunt and effective guidance, and this time the shift came smoothly and without the desperation of the ravine. His wolf was large and dark-coated with the silver crescent high on the left side of his chest, exactly where it had been before. Leo shifted beside him. His wolf was lighter, the pale gray of winter birches, with the same crescent marking in the same position. They ran together north toward the Frostmere Ridge, where the pines were dark against the sky, and the ground was cold and firm under their paws, and the moon was clear overhead with no red in it, just white light falling flat and clean across the slope. They run hard, covering ground the way wolves cover it when they are not running from anything or toward anything in particular, but simply running because they can, and because the night is open and the ridge is long, and there is no particular reason to stop. Down in the citadel, in the eastern wing on the third floor, Maya Noonan stood at her window and watched the two shapes moving up the ridge in the moonlight. She pressed one hand against the cold glass. She did not look away. The kingdom of Ironvale had built itself over 4 centuries on the principle that bloodline was destiny and that destiny could be managed by those with the power to define it. It had been wrong about this, as it turned out. Blood does not ask permission. It does not accept definitions imposed from outside. It simply exists, and it waits, and in the end, it stands up taller than the fear that tried to push it down. The Luna Queen had rejected the darker pup under a red moon 12 years ago. She had done it out of fear, and the fear had cost her things she could not get back, and had cost her son things that she would spend the rest of her life making good on, imperfectly and persistently, and without the comfort of having earned forgiveness. But the blood had returned, not to destroy the house, but to correct it. It had come back in the form of a 12-year-old boy who had grown up hauling water in the cold and had saved his brother's life at the edge of a ravine and had looked his mother in the eye across a stone table and chosen to stay present rather than let the past speak for him. The two wolves on the ridge ran side by side under the clear moon, their markings identical, their pace matched, the ground the same beneath them both. No shadow, no division. Two brothers, and a kingdom that had finally told the truth,